And now, the Break It Down Show with John and Pete.
Hey, what's up, good people? Shaka Senghor here, author of Righting My Wrongs. About to rock out with my mans on the Break It Down Show. So tune in, check us out. Let us know what you think.
Cool. This is Pete. I'm here in Hilliard's place because you know we love Hilliard.
Yes,
we love
sir.
recording here. John is up north, so we're going solo without him this time. But we have Shaka Senghor. Compliments of Jay Moore, who set this all up. Thank you, Jay, very much.
Shout out to Jay.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
absolutely. A shout out to Jay. We're going to do what we typically do, Shaka, is we try to build off of what Jay has done. So it's kind of like a complimentary show because you've told your story in a lot of places. Let's try to find some new ground and play around, but have a good time. And then I just want to say this. You sort of recently have been in solitary confinement. I sort of recently have been in a firefight.
Okay, you got to explain that shit. What you talking
I know, right?
You know, I've done a lot of time in combat zones.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of similarities that I've gathered. And that's not just me talking. That's other people talking to me about what inner city people go to. But before I lose my point, we're here on the own lot where all kinds of crazy TV things happen. And if I was to tell you 10 years ago, by the way, you're going to be talking to some white dude on the Oprah lot, you'd be like, not a goddamn chance, you know?
Yeah.
So the world,
First of all, I'm here too, so it ain't just the own motherfucking own lot.
that's true. Yeah.
It sounds good though to say the own lot though.
It does. And it's all happens because of Hilliard, because he does host
Yes,
us. And we
sir.
do appreciate it always. And just to be sitting in your office also blows me away. So
Yeah, got some dope
no
art
matter
up in here.
where you're at personally or what kind of struggles you're going through, just keep grinding because good things happen and you just cannot say where you're going to, you cannot know where you're going to be. And if you keep showing love and being kind and improving yourself, you're going to end up in a better place. With that said, man, thank you for being in this better place with us.
Thank y'all for having me. You're right. 10 years ago, that would have been 2007. Yeah, I was still in prison. So yeah,
Yeah.
Been doing a podcast on the own lot, you know. So it's a great space to be in right now.
It is a great space to be in, and I want to talk to you a little bit. So I don't know if you're familiar with Devone Bogan's work, but he does a thing on, basically his program is this. He went to Richmond, California, which was just hard-hitting, really rough, and he said, give me the 25 worst dudes you got.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show them respect, and we're going to reach out as a community to these guys, as a city employee, and basically went out and put out the little name tent, like,
He went to the worst projects out there. Dude.
Yeah.
To the hardcore.
give me the most,
OGs, all
yes,
of them.
the most murderous sons of
Yeah.
bitches that you got, the guys that are the guys that you're trying to chase and put in jail right now. Give me all these guys. Put little name tents out in front of their names in the boardroom where consultants come and all these people come. And it would say, James Michaels or whatever the guy's name would be. It wasn't his street name. It was his legit name. It's like, I want to apologize to you that we didn't get to you sooner as a community. We, and it showed him respect and said, this is what we offer you. We're going to come in and basically build a family around him. We had these guys that had come out of San Quentin that were kind of like, now they were going to become the uncles. And they're like, I don't care what happens, what you do. I know you're going to fuck up.
Right.
But I'm not going to quit.
Right.
You cannot make me quit. I'm going to be here. It might take you 10 years, but I'm going to be here. You might die.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing that's going to happen because I'm not going to quit. Yeah. So, and what happens is the bulk, like the mass majority of these guys get it figured out. Not easy. Yeah. It's real hard. Some of them go back to jail, come back and go, you know what? I'm tired of being a dumbass. I'm going to, but it takes that kind of social accountability from the top to kind of rewire these guys. And that's what he tries to do. Yeah. So I know that has to resonate with you. What are your thoughts? Because I know you're trying to work on the rehabilitation thing within that. If you guys want to know Shaka's story, you can see I've already blown past that because it's out there so much. But you went to jail for 20 years for murder. There were drugs involved, all kinds of the standard things that you would want to stereotype and put together. And you said, enough of that. I'm gonna self-rehabilitate. Yeah. So what are we missing in the communities, in the places like Richmond, in the places like Chicago, where the hardest things are happening, the most crime is happening? What are we missing out on?
I think the model in Richmond is a great place to start. When you start treating people with dignity and respect, and you really take the time out to understand how does a person land into a space where they think the way that you resolve conflict is through gun violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so once you can take a holistic look at a person's life experience, you're going to really understand being in those spaces. Brian Stevenson always says in order to solve a problem, you have to be in close proximity to it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when you're thinking about policing in communities where there's high level of gun violence, it's not people aren't really delving into what's happening in those communities. So they're just kind of on the outside coming in and saying, okay, we'll arrest the bad guys and we'll fix it. But without realizing that they're leaving a gap for new bad guys to emerge,
Sure.
if you will. And so I think when you start at a space of dignity, you start at a space of acknowledging another person's humanity and really understanding that, we're all capable of making poor decisions. You put people in the right circumstances, you can see that happen. There was actually a film on HBO.
The Jay-Z one?
Not the Jay-Z one, the Night Of.
Oh, God, I love that one. Yeah.
So,
I didn't see it. Tell me about this.
Yeah.
Is it good?
Dude.
So the short version is this kid, he gets caught up with this woman who she ends up dead. They accuse him of the murder, locks him up. He's an innocent, sweet kid. Mm-hmm. He gets caught up in this volatile environment, and the environment turns him into a product of the environment. So he goes from innocent kid walking in prison, worrying about whether he's going to make it out, to now he's in here shanking people and shit, right? And it happens though, right? Because the environments can cultivate things inside of people that they don't even know exist when you've got to survive. And most of the guys growing up in Richmond and Chicago and Detroit and all these other tougher communities, they're in survival mode, And when you're in survival mode, you're not thinking about 10 years from now, what does my life look like? Because you're not even expecting to be alive 10 years from now.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
You said a really interesting thing, survival mode.
Yeah.
And when I think of survival mode in the hood, I'm like, survival mode means I don't give a fuck anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you get to that space where it doesn't, nothing else matters but you and what you and you know what I mean? So that's interesting.
And it's the mass though, right? So, I go in hoods everywhere in the nation. Like I'm comfortable in any community that's not a neighborhood I've never felt like, I shouldn't be here. Yeah. Because what I realize is that tough exterior you see, that's a protective shield. And when you recognize it's a protective shield, then you learn how to lift those layers back by just really being thoughtful. So when I walk in a store and this guy's hanging out, I don't, put my head down and put my hands in my pocket and walk past him. I'm like, hey, what's up, bro?
Speak.
What's going on? Let's, what's good today, right? And they open up, and then we're having a conversation. I tell them a little bit about my story, and then they're intrigued, and they want to learn more. Like, how did you get out of this lifestyle? What were the steps you took to get out of it, So I think what Devon is his name, right?
Yeah, Devon. Yep.
I think what he started with is dignity and commitment. And those are two things that people are attracted to. If you can dignify somebody, then you can commit to them, then they'll open up and they'll be willing to look at some other alternatives, But most of the time we're just talking at people instead of really listening and talking with people.
Yeah, starting from that place of dignity and respect, and again, understanding it's hard work. I mean, he's taking guys that have mental problems, they have social disorders. Let's be honest, like the presence of parents in these kind of places, either through neglect or through just absolute, I have to have 3 jobs. You don't get to touch your babies enough. You don't get to talk to them enough. And we already know that stuff already puts you on a path towards less good, And so now you're trying to convince someone that, hey, we're here to help you. And then let's be honest, if I show up, big dumb white dude shows up in East Palo Alto back in the day when you were there, or Detroit, and I'm like, I'm here to help you. I got some work to do.
Right.
I mean, I can get there, but I have to be genuine because they got no reason to believe me, and they shouldn't. I'm not like them. I'm not them. And it's really hard to get past that. So Devon starting with that dignity. And then he also says, hey, look, you guys are all going to end up dead or in jail. That's the case. Here's the case file on all you guys. This is you. We just can't prove it yet. And I'm not the police, but we know this is coming. And you guys are being hunted, and you know this. You're being hunted by the police, and you're being hunted on the streets. Do you want to change that? And some of those guys are like, nope, I'm going to ride until it's over.
But here's the trick, though. The gangs would tell you now, back when I was growing up, and I grew up in a blood neighborhood, when I grew up in a neighborhood where the homeboys would tell you what was coming. Yeah. Now they tell you, are you willing to die because this is coming? Right. You know what I mean? It's a trip.
Yeah, I think it's been a shift in street culture, period, specifically gang culture. Like, I'm from Detroit, and we have a different type of street culture. Like, we don't really have the sophisticated, organized gang structures like a Chicago or like a LA, which I think probably are the most sophisticated in the country. But a lot of them originated through social platforms, so they didn't start off like, let's shoot up and kill each other. It was also actually like, how do we build up the community? How do we take these resources and pool them together and actually feed people, So a lot of that was born out of the Black Panther Party and other social
And they were
organizations.
together at first.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you had a lot of things emerge, the drug trafficking. Obviously, when crack cocaine hit, like that changed the whole landscape of urban America for the worse.
Correct.
And so now with that fallout being what it is, it's like, okay, how do we go back and fix some of these things? And to me, I think that what Devon has done is he's tapped into a resource that most people ignore. And that's men coming back to the community from prison and men who have survived, the early ages of the crack epidemic because it's a skill set that we bring to the table that nobody else has. And we have to see them as resources if we want to stop the bloodshed. Yeah.
So one of the problems with his program, and this is not the problem of the program, but it's the perception. So when he goes to city councils, because he's taking this thing nationwide now because it works. He's done it cohort after cohort after cohort of these guys. They're coming off the streets. They're becoming tradesmen. They're like, we had a show. I'm sure Hilliard heard it. We had a show with some of the graduates from the program, and they're the most boring guys ever now. They're like, I go to work and I'm a heavy equipment operator and I got bills. And you're like, this show sucks. But when you step back and go, that guy was pimping hoes. Yeah. Just a couple years ago, like harming people left and right. And this guy was notorious. The other guy was like everybody thought I was 7 feet tall and killed people every day, so I had to have this reputation. And even when I see cops, like even years after I kind of got better, I still have this emotional response to be like, I got to be ready, So
me too.
Is that its own little PTSD though?
Oh,
absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Like that's, it's interesting with all of the incidents happening around the country with policing in inner cities and just the different narratives. Is, people on the outside of those communities looking in are often like, well, what if people would have just stopped resisting and, or why are people out looting and protesting? But the reality is when you live in communities that's overly police, there's a trauma that's inflicted on the people in those communities.
And they always catch you when they're messing with you. You ain't did shit. That's the problem.
Yeah, and I mean the reality is like when you grow up on the streets, you grow up with a certain understanding. It's not right, but we expect to have our rights violated when the police pull up. We don't expect them to say, "Hey, you can call your attorney down here before I question you." We expect them to jump out the car, beat our ass, slam you on the hood of the car, rough you up, see what you got in your pockets, and tell them, not to hope they don't catch you out there. And to some of their credit, sometimes when they would find us with stuff, they would throw it away because they don't feel like doing the paperwork or whatever, or it's not enough for a real case. And so it becomes this kind of illegal agreement that happens in the hood. But what happens is that starts trickling over to people who aren't in that lifestyle. And so just by virtue of you being black male in this environment, there's no
never
drug.
thought about it like that. That's totally true.
No, it's deep, and you're sitting in the car because it's a nice car, and they pull up and it's like, get out the car. It's no, you can just give me a license ID. It's like, get your ass out the car or we beating your ass. Like that's just reality. So the shock to the nation is going to come because stuff has been captured on television. Yeah. On video through cameras, which I think is a great thing. But I'm also afraid is that it's going to desensitize us to feeling like we don't have a means by which to change this. And we can, and then the officers have PTSD too, which most people don't think about, right?
Yeah.
If you working in a neighborhood where there's high levels of gun violence, you're walking in with fears, with apprehension, and that turns into hyper-aggression. Because that's what
happened with Foreman.
Or hyper-defensiveness. It's those are the real problems. One of the things that I've encountered to be in combat zones is I figured out that when you try to bring stability to a region, and let's be honest, where you guys had to grow up, it's a conflict zone. It's a war zone. People die all the time. So when the U.S. Army shows up, we have great intention to not harm people.
They call it Chirac now? Shit.
Chirac,
no kidding. It's dangerous there. Yeah. But your mere presence lends to the instability. So you're already above the instability bar where a kid walking down the street's like, I have to make a decision. Do I join a set? Do I represent something that I'm not? Do I just go to school? They have no control over their own safety. Yeah. Right. Parents are having to make decisions based on this unstable environment where, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's got to be high for a young black male in an urban setting or a person of color in an urban setting to have one close relative dead, one in jail, and several committing crimes on a daily basis just because of the nature of where they are, not because of who they are, but they're product of their environment.
Here's an interesting thing, and I wonder if you can relate to this at all, or how much do you relate to this? So I grew up, like I said, we from Detroit. We moved to Brooklyn. We were like military kids, so we were traveling around. When we moved to the Bay Area, to Palo Alto, to East Palo Alto, it was like the number 3 freaking place in the world where people was killed. It was like a small Detroit, right? Yeah. And it's what, 3 miles wide, 3 miles long? It's tiny.
Yeah, tiny.
Tiny. And the trip is I grew up in a neighborhood where, as far as I knew, cats my age, I'm the only dude I knew who had his mom and dad. I didn't know nobody who had their mom and dad, right? Not my age, right? And so what I found is nobody has a role model at all. So if you have that in your neighborhood, you become the family that everybody's closing in on and wanting to be like. Yeah. You know what I mean? In some way. I don't know how that relates to you in any kind of way, but I just wondered, did you see that? Did you experience that? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, it's interesting. So growing up in Detroit is a very complex city. It's the difference between Detroit and Chicago. So Chicago probably had like 700 murders last year, if not more than that, which is astronomical.
Crazy.
Chicago also has 3 million people.
True.
Detroit probably had about 350 murders, but it's 700,000 people.
Damn.
Yeah.
And, there's areas in Chicago where you can go and you wouldn't even know the south side of Chicago exists unless you're actually from there, because it's like a regular community where people are, and then
they tore down most of the projects, didn't they?
Yeah, and then you go to the south side and it's just a whole different world. It's, it's the real hood. In Detroit, it's like the hood all across the city, right? And so it makes it tough because kids growing up in that environment, they're traumatized very early on. So even the kids who grow up in 2-parent households, they're still subject to the trauma around them because of the environment itself, the instability in the environment. But what I've also found is that it's deeper than just having 2 parents. It's the kind of parents you have.
Yes, definitely.
It's the parents that have a sense of awareness about what is happening in the community and what they contribute or don't contribute to the community. Yeah. And like I always tell people, when we were doing what we were doing, we was less than 10% of the community. It wasn't like the community is all bad. Most of the people on my block got up, worked every day, and did what was necessary to take care of their family. And so sometimes I think the media does a horrible job of misrepresenting the realities that exist in those communities.
It's a very small number of those people. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they magnify a lot of things and make it seem worse than what it is in a lot of ways. But it doesn't take away from the reality that a lot of people are dying that don't have to die. And it takes a certain political effort. It takes social fortitude, and it takes a collective commitment to creating better outcomes and producing better outcomes. And it started by looking at all of our resources. And I think one of the areas we've got in trouble in this country is we've played this whole idea of we have to be politically correct. And political correctness has ruined opportunities for people who could be adding value if they didn't have to cut through red tape. Like there's been instances where they've told me I can't go into a high school to speak to kids because I have a felony.
Right.
I'm like, who the hell is better suited to keep them out of prison than somebody who's actually been through it, right? No, seriously, right? In our juvenile detention center, there was an organization that was doing work inside the detention center, and they was like, yeah, we want you to come in. And then their higher ups was like, well, he has a felony, so he can't go in up under our brand. So I literally was just like, I went over their head and went straight to the director and was like, hey, I want to come in and speak to these young guys. Yeah. Because when I was in there, nobody came and talked to us. Nobody came and said that, look.
They don't respect nobody who ain't like them.
Yeah, no doubt, and there has to be a connection, and he was like, this is a no-brainer. So he got me in. But that's what we do in this country, right? We play political correct so long. We've played it so long that it has destroyed, opportunities to change communities in a real way, and it's like, even with the foundation, they come in and they want to pick the perfect guy to spearhead, organization. They dump a whole bunch of money and then they never can produce outcomes because they don't have a connection to the people.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's like me going into the hood and trying to affect change. Yes, it's possible for me to do that, but I have to deal with the barriers that are in front of me, So I'm going to kind of go back to Devon's program again. One of the things when people see and they perceive and they write about his program, they write that Devon's program pays criminals to not commit crimes. That is in the minutest way true. He has a stipend. He's like, as you hit these marks, yes, the community is going to give you money because we need you to transition from street money to legit money.
Right.
But if you don't do your shit, I will write you a check for $1, and I'll write it, and I'll pay that $1 out of my own pocket because I want you to learn the lesson. Because the city's not going to pay this bill. You're going to understand that, yeah, you didn't do your work. Here's your $1 check. Get back to work. But it's not presented that way to the people. So all the people that are like, oh, all this terrible stuff in Chicago, but would never go to Chicago because it's too dangerous, right? You know, they're like, well, you can't pay criminals. He's not paying criminals to not commit crime. He's paying young men who were trying to respect, you know, give them money as a stipend to get them through their period of getting through anger management courses, getting through all of the drug rehab that they might have to, whatever they need to do in their program as a whole.
But it also shows them because they don't think they can make money any other way anyway.
Right. You're
So
trying
if
to
you know you can make money one way, it'll give you at least an option.
Right, because they're journeymen in the hood. Like they, you know, I know how to make this money here. Here's how I do it. I pimp hoes. I whatever they do, whatever crime it is they commit to do it. Now he's trying to get them to not do that. So if we reject good work, like you said, you have to have a community backing it. If we reject good work because we think it's expensive and try to pay cop overtime, and listen, I love police, but it's expensive to put cops out there on overtime, you know, to create more instability. And that's not the cop's fault. That's just the dynamic of instability. So you're paying cops to create more instability, and you can't take what would amount to just one cop's overtime for the year would take care of a lot of funding for these programs. So getting these, again, Devone's taking the worst people off the streets and getting these guys to say, yeah, I'd like to go work hard and get a legitimate check and not get hunted all the time. But we can't characterize it as a program where we pay criminals to do things. What else he does, he puts a Crip and a Blood or, you know, whatever set, opposite dudes on a plane sitting side by side. Like you two are going to go to,
good.
right. And you're going to go to DC, you're going to go to South Africa, and all that stuff's paid for, not by the community, but by people who contribute towards what they do. And like these guys go on badass trips. It gets them out of their element. They sit next to someone they're supposed to hate, and all of a sudden they realize, shit, we're the same guy.
Yeah.
You know?
He's human too.
Yeah, but see, I think again that's where the political correctness comes in at, because if you just deal with dollar amounts, the cost to incarcerate somebody, I'm sure, is a lot more than what it's taking him to invest in somebody staying out. And because it's not just keeping them out of prison, it's also allowing them to add value to the community. Because now they're working with young guys who would probably be on their way to prison,
right,
or on their way to destroying something in the community. And so, to me, I think that we should invest in people. I think that we should incentivize people to work in their communities and to stabilize their communities. And I think that we should reinvest a lot of the money that was saved by avoiding a person going to prison back into the community. And it's just, you know, again, it's the political correct thing. I remember I was in prison, and this was around 96. I say 96. So then President Clinton at the time, he passed this crime bill that took college funding out of prison. At the time, I was averaging a 4.0.
Yeah.
I had never, you know, accomplished anything. I mean, I was a smart honor roll student growing up, but once I got into late middle school, high school, like I was caught up in the street culture.
So it wasn't that you wasn't smart. You just wasn't going to class.
Right? Yeah, just wasn't going to class because there was a whole bunch of other issues.
Yeah, you're doing your journeyman. You were doing your craft training. You were learning what you guys do. Sure.
But imagine that moment when you were in prison, and you were working on a degree, and you're averaging a 4.0, and then they say, well, you know what? You can't go to college anymore because of this new crime bill. Even though it's been proven that people who come out of prison with higher education is least likely to recidivate. And so that whole political correctness has wreaked havoc. And so the prison population has exploded from that time forward, from like literally probably a little under 1 million to over 2.2 million men and women incarcerated. And a large part of that is recidivism. We have the highest recidivism rate in the world. We have 70% of people get out of prison, they go back. So it's not that there are new people coming to prison that's reflecting these numbers.
Right.
It's that we're not providing men and women who are inside with opportunities to adjust to society, make something of their lives, re-enter as an asset instead of a liability because of political correctness. And so once we can get past that, and that's what I've been pushing people on, is like, you know, you want to solve the problem, then you got to do real shit. Like you can't, you know, it can't be cute, neat, and packaged. You got to do real shit.
These numbers aren't 100% precise, but they're close enough for what we're doing. $750,000 every time a bullet pierces a human body in a gang type situation. Life flight, aftercare, and now, you know, I've never actually been hit by a bullet, but I've had them whiz within inches of my face. That still fucks with me. If it hits me, what kind of physical element do I have? Like my ability. Maybe I'm fine, but you're never 100%. There's always something, right?
I have a bullet.
Yeah, you've been
right
shot.
now, and I've been shot. I got
So $750,000 for that. Every inmate costs the people, let's say, $50,000 on average, and it could be a lot more.
Yeah, depending on security level. Yeah.
Right, and what they charge the state in terms of going to court and the what they consuming in their legal right to go fight their case. I mean, there's a lot of money involved in this. We put more people in jail than any other nation in the world.
Yeah,
most of it are young black men. My biggest problem with death row, and there are some people that absolutely didn't need to not be on the earth, but when we have DNA evidence exonerating people who are on death row, we ought to stop killing folks for a minute until we can figure out that we got the right person. Because I know it's real easy. And this is a white dude saying this. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to go, the black guy did it. Mm-hmm. He was scary looking and everything else. So, yeah, those are big problems. All those numbers scream that you're like, man, you know what? For $750,000, I can put 6 dudes through a high-end Stanford level education. Mm-hmm. And I ought to be doing that instead of funding for some guy to go on a life flight to save his life. We have to figure this out.
Let me just ask you, Shaka, just in regard to talking about this, because you went overseas, if I'm correct, and visited some of the prisons there. Now, can we tell the kids about that shit?
Yeah, so it was mind blowing. So I went to Germany in 2015. So I got invited over there by the Vera Institute to go do some research on prisons in Germany. Mm-hmm. And, I had my own biases. I can admit that I was like, shit, it's Germany. This is probably going to be the most horrible prison experience I've had since I've been in prison. So I was a little apprehensive, about going into a German prison. For one, I was like, they might not let me out.
By the way,
let my mama know where I am, right?
But I need to figure out my
Ich habe eine warrant.
But I got over there, and what I saw was mind blowing. The humane approach to incarceration literally, turned over everything that I had thought going in. I mean, you think about Germany and its history, and it doesn't have a great history of treatment of people, specifically, Jewish people and people of color. And so I go in with all these biases, and I noticed something immediately is that they didn't call the guys prisoners.
Really?
These were basically citizens of our country who have made a poor decision. So they started there with how they treat each other. Okay. The interactions between the men and women who worked there and the men who were housed there was akin to you showing up at a work site and, hey, Joe, how was your day?
What?
So it wasn't this, hey, get in the cell, shut up, you idiot. It wasn't none of this. And so what they basically do is, like, from the moment a person is arrested, they're working to prepare them for life after prison. They're working to make sure that they have the social skills, that they have employment opportunities, that they have connections to family. Like, it's mandatory for them to get conjugal visits.
What? Mandatory?
Mandatory. Like, it's like you can't deny a person conjugal visits.
Really?
And it's not just for the reasons that when we think conjugal, the first thing we think is hot sex in some room from somebody who
they just want you to have.
Right, they want you to have family connection where you can actually spend time with your children, with your wife, with your loved ones, and it's so important because human touch is so important. Right. The ability to hug somebody and be hugged and to be patted on the back or whatever. But employment, like, they actually leave prison and go work in the community for real, no matter how much time they're serving.
So it's not on their record like felons and all that shit there.
No, even if it's on their record, they still have to work. They have an opportunity to work in real jobs. Huh. They have what's called lifelong sentences. They don't have indeterminate life sentences where you're going to die in prison. They have lifelong sentences where once you get to a certain number of years, there's an opportunity for you to get your freedom back, unless you're just being a horrible, horrible person in there, which is rarely the case, right? So you don't have people serving 30 or 40 years in prison. They're serving, on a lifelong sentence, they might serve 10 years, which is a long time for anybody, no matter what the circumstance is. And then they recognize the difference between mental illness and people who are just committing crimes, because a lot of stuff that we see that we've criminalized mental illness. A lot of the things that we utilize to scare people into voting these dumbass laws into place is based on people who have mental illness. So when a person goes and kills multiple people, that's not a crime. That's a psychological issue that we have to treat in a very different way. You know, when you think about rape and pedophilia, like that's psychological stuff that has happened to people and traumatize them and make them think that these things are okay. So they need treatment. They don't need to just be thrown in the cell. They need treatment to address that core issue in the first place. And then we shouldn't be able to use the criminalization of people with mental illness to scare people into voting into practice these ridiculous laws. And so what I saw over there was mind-blowing. And just the last point, so out of the 19 years I did in prison, 7 was in solitary confinement. And when I was in Germany, they had the cells. We can go in and look at the cells. And I remember just kind of stepping in there and just, you know, I was having my own little moment of just thinking like, wow, you know, just at that point, so that was 2015. So I've been out about 5 years or so. And I was just like, wow, just 5 years ago, you know, this was the reality, right? So I was in my own little moment, and the warden, she came in, and she was like, hey, are you okay? And I was like, you know, I'm fine. I'm just, you know, processing what it was like being in the cell. And I told her, I was like, you know, I was in solitary confinement for a long time. I did like 4.5 years straight. And the warden started to weep.
Really?
And she said,
make me cry over here.
She literally, when she said it was mind blowing though, she was like, we would never do this to one of our citizens.
John and Pete.
Hey everybody, if you like the Break It Down show,
I can dig it.
And of course you do.
of course you do, hit that subscribe button.
John and Pete.
It helps us out.
Hey, if you're going to like the show on Facebook or on Twitter, it helps us out if you share the show so people can learn about it. So liking it is great, sharing is even better.
Let's do some spy stuff.
Yeah, just
let's
sneak
get
in
all
there.
our friends' phones and have them subscribe to the Break It Down show. Do it. Subscribe, listen to the show. If you love the show, tell 5 of your friends. Or if you hate the show, tell 5 of your friends.
And I had that, and that's when it hit me. It's like the men and women that's incarcerated in our system, we don't see them as our brothers and sisters. We don't see them as our fellow citizens. We don't see them as people who made poor decisions for whatever reasons.
Right.
Some people who have been falsely accused. We just don't see, we don't have the empathy and the compassion in this country to really, you know, step outside of the emotion of the moment to say, you know, 90% of these men and women are coming back to our community. And we have to decide what kind of men and women we want to come back. Do we want angry, bitter people to come back? You know, I can tell you I'm fortunate. You know, I'm blessed, and I am not a product of anything that worked in the system. Like, I want to be very clear about that, because some people had a perception that, oh, well, it worked for this guy. He did 19 years, and I look at him, he's an upstanding citizen. But I was fortunate. I had incredible mentors who are dying in prison right now.
Right.
These are men who have been serving life sentences since they've been kids. And they poured into me, and they gave me books to read, and they challenged me, and they told me that I can come out on the other side of that time, even when I couldn't even imagine 20 years down the line. And so I was one of the lucky ones. And then the other part of it is I was literate.
Right.
Like, I went to prison, I was literate. I was highly, So I was highly literate going to prison, so I could read. I can read books. I can read books that, you know, help shape my thinking in a different way. The average reading level in prison is 3rd grade.
Sure.
You know, the average math level was 3rd grade. Unless you count street math, then it's probably like off the fucking charts. Like,
they can count them Benjamins.
Yeah, I know how to count that money. But even in that, like what I found through my work, I had a fellowship at MIT Media Lab, and I had this moment where I was working with a bunch of students. I was just going to different labs, and I'm, you know, watching them work on these projects, and I would just join their team, you know. And I was helping them troubleshoot so much shit so quick. They was like, damn, like, how do you know all this? I'm like, well, I've been innovating my whole life. When you come from, you know, poverty and desperation, you figure out how to take the scraps and make them into something.
Yeah.
And I had this moment. I was like, this is what guys has been doing. The same thing that's happening in the media lab. You have guys in prison doing right now to survive.
Sure.
And so I did a hackathon at MIT Media Lab.
Get out.
I literally had them do 5 things that we would do in prison. Like, one was creating tattoo guns, right?
Okay, right.
And you would create a tattoo gun out of the tape player motor, an ink pen, a guitar string, and you would turn that into a tattoo gun.
Right.
And so I had the students and faculty students, faculty, everybody at Media Lab joining this hackathon, and I had them do it, and they couldn't do it.
Right.
Yeah,
You know,
at MIT.
They couldn't do it. And then there was another thing that when you need to heat up water, like you don't have fancy microwaves in most prisons, especially the older prisons. So you have to take an extension cord, fingernail clippers, and you connect them and you create what's called a stinger, which is how you heat your water up. And it's a science to doing it. Otherwise, you blow the power out on the tier. You blow the power out on the tier. Now you got a whole other list of issues. The guys don't want to stab you, right? So, I mean, it's just real. Like, you blow the power out, you inconvenience to people.
Yeah.
And you can get really seriously hurt. And so when we did this hackathon, like, they couldn't figure that out. And they, like, blew the power at the media lab. I was like, hell yeah. Just blew the power out.
I want to, you're saying hackathon. I know what that is because I've got a podcast about technology stuff. So explain a little bit about what a hackathon is so our folks out there can hang with us.
So this particular hackathon is really troubleshooting. It's really like engineering and figuring out how do you basically reverse engineering, breaking something down to its core, figuring out how it works, how can you make it work better, how can you take the resources around you and create something new and innovative. And so that's what we did. And, you know, the point of doing it was this. Had one of those students made that tattoo gun, everybody in that room would have celebrated them. They would have been heralded as a genius for taking these little scraps and creating something that's very functional. Like my tattoos, like all these happened in prison with prison-made tattoo gun. There was no like regular tattoo gun. And so that would have happened, right?
Yeah.
But when you get caught with it in prison, instead of somebody saying, well, you know what, there's a skill set.
Let's invest in this.
You know, let's figure out how can we get you in some type of engineering school. Or how can we get you into utilizing the science behind this for something meaningful. So we just throw people away, you know?
Yeah, we have a problem in our nation with, well, first off, let's back up and look at other nations as well. Somalia doesn't really have a criminal system. They're largely a nomadic society, tribal society. So they don't have a tax base to support a large penal system. So there is no penal law. You know, there's murders there, but it gets dealt with in civil court, which is in a tent with old dudes, and they're like, here's what's going to go down. And sometimes it means that dude dies because he took something, he took someone's life, he's going to lose his life. But they work it out in other ways. So there are, in fact, other ways to do this. We got to get better at that. And we seem to have this, and we've had it for a long time, this struggle between do we punish or do we rehabilitate, you know? And we just can't seem to decide. And so what we have is a system where we continue to fail all these citizens because we struggle with institutionalizing people that struggle with reality, you know, and because we don't like to do that anymore. We want to give everybody a chance, and people need some real help, you know, a lot of them. And then we have folks that are brought up in an environment where third grade reading level, and that's acquired over a longer time than third grade, you know, because they aren't touched, they aren't talked to. They miss all those vital brain establishing moments where those things turn on, they have the advantages everybody else does. They really get messed up.
Well, it's not cool to read a book in the hood.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So all these things go against this system. And then once you get in the system, everything you do afterwards is weighted by this. Like you've been able to break it, but we know you're exceptional in your ability to break out of this. But if you've got a felony, you can't go talk to kids, or you can't easily go do it. Yeah. When you go ask for a job, they're like, well, what have you done criminally? Like, well, a long time. So here's the example from my hometown. Senior year, one of the guys had graduated before he came back and shot and killed his girlfriend on the campus right there. Murdered her, murder too. And our community is devastated by it to this day. That, you know, the people from my era really were hurt by this. Wow. But this guy was a young, confused, and people will be upset with me for sort of even taking his side at all, but he was 18, 19 years old. It turns out he was young and confused, and he made bad decisions, which is just about every 18 and 19-year-old dude around. He chose to have his gun in his hand, which obviously is a terrible decision. And either he purposely shot it or it was accidental. Who knows about that? But that decision kept him in jail for the next 20-plus years. During that time, he became a journeyman metal worker. Like, he learned how to machine. You know, he did everything the state and the quote-unquote people asked him to do. He did the acts of contrition. He spoke out, you know, for victims groups. He accepted what they had to say. He was one of the people they got to talk to because he did the crime. And he went, and year after year, they denied his parole, had a great family system around him, was religious, ultimately was married. You know, so he had everything that you'd want to have someone who's rehabilitated. Right. And so he's been out, and he contributes to society. He pays taxes, and it's an ideal situation. But we know that That is not common.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, I'm sure you probably wanted to tap in on that, but let me just ask you quick because I was just thinking about it. You were talking about Germany and how they treat them over there. Mm-hmm. What's keeping the guys over there from going back in if it's so good? You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. And why do we treat prison like prison and they treat it like a rehabilitation place? You feel me?
Well, I think it starts with understanding how people land in a space where they end up in prison in the first place. And the idea of punishment, which to me I think is ridiculous, because basically what the idea says is that we're going to hurt you more.
So you never want to come back.
Hurt somebody, shit, right? Yeah. So you don't never want to come back without thinking about this cycle that hurt people, and that most of the people that land in the environment come from backgrounds of deep hurt, child abuse, sexual abuse, substance abuse. So they're used to being hurt. You know, we were used like being hurt was nothing new to us. It was like, shit, this is par for the course, right? Yeah. Because this is what we're accustomed to. And what that does is it tells you that your life has no value. And when you're dealing with a person who don't feel like their life has no value, right? And they don't value anything around them, you know. So logic would say, how do you produce better outcomes by doing the same thing that's been happening to them in the beginning, right? So you continue to hurt people, you treat them like animals and savages, and you beat them and you punish them, and you deprive them of just basic necessities for years. And then say, okay, now go outside and play nicely with society.
And don't hang out with your friends.
Right. It doesn't work like that, right? I mean, like...
You realize we don't have parks in the neighborhood. It's all it's all brick and shit and cement.
Right. You know,
that's why we're standing outside.
Yeah. And so now you have these people who have been further traumatized, and now they're supposed to go out and adjust to society, get a job, right, live and play well with others. It just doesn't work like that. So what Germany has done is they've tapped into that reality that these people probably have never been treated with dignity and respect. So how about if we treat them with dignity and respect and allow them to work in a way, educate themselves in a way to where they find a sense of purpose and a sense of value. They find their own self-worth and dignity. Yeah. Because that's the thing, like in a lot of instances, you don't feel dignified. Sure. You know, you don't feel respected. And so, if you don't already have a high sense of self-worth, it's hard to make that transition. But if you can build that into people, and that's, for me, that's what it was. It was like reading books. I was like, okay, I'm not this stereotype. You know, I made some of the stereotypical decisions that landed me in here, but that's not all of who I am. I'm a creative. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. You know, I'm a great friend. I'm a thought leader. So there's all these different things that I was able to own through writing and through journaling and through having great mentors that saw value. And so it produced a different outcome. You know, if I'd have got out probably in that first 5 years, I'd have been right back in prison because I was caught up in the midst of the craziness. And so the thing is, like, time doesn't dictate outcomes. It's like, what do you do to people when they're incarcerated? And what do you do for them? And what do you allow them to do for themselves? Right. And then once you get out here, like, you know, you mentioned your friend, he's a taxpaying citizen. I pay more taxes than the average American citizen. Sure. And I don't have all my rights as a citizen. There are things that I can't do still to this day. Yeah. Even though I pay more taxes than most people. And that shit hurts, especially during tax season. Absolutely. Like, I shouldn't pay y'all.
Next month, they're going to get you.
I shouldn't get all my money, right?
So you're saying you didn't vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, right, you know. But it's serious, you know. It's one of the things. And there are even states where people who have a felony can't vote.
Can't at all, yeah, right.
But they still have to pay taxes. Right. Which is unfair. So it's taxation without representation. There's lack of access to a lot of things. Like, you can be legally discriminated against when it comes to getting housing. One of the most fundamental building blocks of a successful life is being able to find somewhere to lay your head at night when you go in. And legally, you can be discriminated against if you have a felony, which is crazy because if you think about this, if a person went and tried to rent an apartment and they were homosexual, and the person said, well, we don't rent to homosexuals, that apartment gets sued. They go rent and you're black and they say, we won't rent to you because you're black, or you go and you're white and they're like, well, we don't rent to white guys. Yeah. Like, you can sue them, but you can't sue them if you have a felony and they tell you that you can't live here because you have a felony. And so, you know, there's so many hurdles and obstacles that we put in place that are intended to hurt people. They're not intended to help people. They're not intended to keep communities safe.
What do you do, though? I mean, it's absolutely correct to say that. And your stuff you talked about with the 13th Amendment with Jay, where like if you're incarcerated, you can be forced to do labor against your will. You can be a slave. Yeah, exactly.
You will be forced.
Yeah,
100%
for basically no money at all.
Yeah.
But there are still people that aren't rehabilitated. The 5 year later you gets out. I don't want to rent to that guy.
Yeah,
so how do we?
Of course, you wouldn't want to rent to the guy who hasn't been rehabilitated.
Right? Yeah. How do we know as a society that like how do we solve that conundrum where I want you 5 years later to be like, hey, I've got a BA, and I'm coming.
But if it were the standard, is what I'm hearing from you, we would know.
We wouldn't have this issue. And then the other part of it is the just having a felony on your record can be so misleading, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Like you hear people say non-violent versus violent offenders. Like that's all the political correctness. It's the safety thing. It's like, we'll treat them different, right? The reality is most people don't even know what it means to be a violent offender. Mm-hmm. Like literally, you can go to jail for getting into a fist fight,
right?
And now you're labeled as a violent offender because they charge you with assault,
right?
Like you got a fucking fist fight at the bar. How many kids don't have that happen at some point in their life?
Yeah, right.
And just happen to not get incarcerated for it. You know?
Yeah.
I speak on college campuses all the time, and there are young, privileged white kids getting drunk at bars, having fist fights. All you got to do is go on World Star Hip Hop. You'll see countless videos of kids fighting, right?
Yeah, very common.
When that happens in the hood, you get charged with an assault of crime, and then you end up in prison, and now you're labeled as an assault of offender.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? You know,
they were just kids out partying, doing too much,
causing a ruckus,
stuff, right?
Yeah.
And even if it's,
hell, I've punched my friends in the face. You know, it's part of drinking and having a good time.
You know, smash and grab, all type of this dumb stuff the kids do.
Yeah.
But for one, I think we have far too many laws on the book in the first place. But I think just this whole idea that a person getting out is the worst person ever, I just think that's unfair.
Sure.
People who have more serious, crimes getting out typically had the lowest recidivism rates of everybody. And it's largely because the spiritual toll that it takes on your life to understand the type of harm you've caused, that does something to you. It helps change you on its own. But I mean, the reality is we have to decide. There are 20 million people in this country or more who have felonies. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. That's damn near 10% of the population.
That's a lot of people, yeah. And so, and when you think about that, that means that these are people who are boxed out of job opportunities, housing opportunities, and then it's hypocritical. It's like hypocritical to say, okay, go serve your time, and then start over. But I can't start over with all my rights. Like I'm an entrepreneur. I was in Detroit. I'm an entrepreneur, and at one point I actually had a brick and mortar.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't legally go get a firearm to protect my business because of something that happened 20 years ago.
Right.
But yet I'm still forced to pay taxes. So you continue to be punished well beyond the sentence you serve. And I just think that's unfair. I think it's hypocritical. I think that we have to decide that either we're going to be a country of second chances or we're not. And then we can't have it both ways. We just got to make up our minds. And so, it took political fortitude to get us in this mess. Sadly, with the current administration, I'm not sure.
It's chaotic for sure.
Where we're going with it. But, it's one of the reasons I'm out here sharing my story. I started off writing fiction. I never had any plans of writing a nonfiction book about my personal life. But what happened is from mentoring and seeing what was happening with so many of these kids who were on the same path. Understanding child abuse and sexual abuse and substance abuse as a child who had experienced those things, understanding suicide, which I talk about in the book. It's a space that we don't talk about. We don't really discuss suicide in society in a way that's healthy.
Especially not in the black neighborhood.
Yeah, definitely not in the black neighborhood.
It's supposed to be unknown. Like, we don't commit suicide. White people commit suicide.
Yeah, and that's real talk,
right?
It's
real. It's a myth.
And so, but I can tell you how many black kids that come to me and be like, I tried to kill myself last week.
Sure.
And something you said changed my outlook. So that's what inspired me to actually write the book, because I felt like if we can really get people to see this whole picture of what our criminal justice system looks like, what it does to families, what it does to people, what could be some positive outcomes if you take some of these things that I utilize in my own life. You said something earlier about people not reading in the hood, and I hear that a lot, and I get offended by it.
I do too. Hey,
I'm
I'm
gonna
tell you speaking
why,
on it.
I'm gonna tell you why I get offended by it, because people in the hood actually do read.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, they read shit that's relevant to them. Like real talk. Like we try to shove and force, because again, political correctness. We try to make people feel like, well, you have to read Shakespeare and Socrates, otherwise it's not literature. But these people are more interested in what I have to say or what, Malcolm X has to say. And it's like, if you can connect people to what their natural interest is and honor that and not do it as if it's inferior, but do it in a way that honors who they are, then you change. Like I get young guys to be like, man, I've never read a book until I read your book. And now they're like, I'm reading all the books on the list right now. We're talking about this through social media and we're kicking. They're asking me, who are some other good authors for me to read? I started off writing fiction because I wanted to appeal to young inner city kids who normally wouldn't read a Stephen King because they didn't see themselves in that story. But they can see themselves in stories I write because it's written in the inner city community, right?
Yeah.
And my literary program that I ran, I used all urban literature. And those kids devoured it. Like they ate it up. They was coming and recommending books to me. It's familiar. And so the thing is, we have to shift from political correctness to doing what's right for people based on who they are, not setting this one standard criteria as if it works for everybody, because it doesn't. And to me, it's like if you start them in a space that honors who they are, they'll read everything, because that's what I did. Like I started off, reading Malcolm and Iceberg Slim and Donald Baldwin and Baldwin and all the Harlem Renaissance writers. But then I evolved to reading Socrates and all these other bodies of work that became intriguing to me because I realized they were telling the same stories.
Same story.
Different landscape.
Different, yeah.
And those books start to become a puzzle you're putting together. You're not reading just the words in that book, but you're like, oh, this is how this plugs in, and this whole like
your imagination can go with it.
Exactly. Yeah. His nephew, I should say Hilliard's nephew, Kevin, has a great show where he tries to knock down a lot of like the poor social and cultural stereotypes in like the hip hop community. It's called Kev Hates Hip Hop, and he talks about don't eat a bunch of bullshit, and quit spending money on things, and spend your time and effort on improving yourself. Invest your money in you, not in someone's brand and everything. And all of those kind of messages that have to get out there. Read these books. Put your time and effort here. All that stuff is good for within the community itself, and then the greater community. Here's my big question I want to ask you. I'm standard white guy, and I hate that people in Chicago are being murdered and the jails are wrong. What the fuck do I do though? I mean, what?
That's a good question.
What does the guy from suburbia do for the guy, the urban dude?
I love that you asked that question because I have some incredibly talented, gifted, amazing friends that aren't from the hood.
Right.
And, they're all hit with this question, right? Like, what do we do? How can we help? And what I always just tell people is that, you just have to be in close proximity. You can't come in as a superhero, as a savior.
Right.
Like, you really just have to get to know people for people. And what you'll find consistently across the board is that the aspirations, the dreams, the goals, the ambitions, desires in inner city America is no different than with the aspirations and dreams and goals in rural America. I think that racism in our country, for one, because we haven't dealt with it in a way that honors all of us. We've dealt with it from victor versus victim. We've dealt with it versus privileged from underprivileged. So we've really dealt with it in a horrible way because, it's all about, being nice. And, when Obama was like, no, you got a black president, so we're post, racism. And the reality
we also
is
had a white president at the same time.
I know, right? And so, it's just these ideas of, really getting beyond our own discomfort. And the discomfort often comes from feeling like I can't go in and say something. No, if you're a citizen of this country, you have a right to say something in any community you go in. And we have to get out of that mindset that we can only do it with permission, or we can only do it. And I mean, of course, there has to be some sensitivity to communities, and there has to be sensitivity to people. But what I found is just when you enter with your heart in the right space,
yes,
you'll be able to have impact anywhere you go in the world. And
because you're a true self.
Yeah, you're a true self. When I first started working with MIT Media Lab, how that came about was they had came in the city, had come to do some research on what was happening in Detroit. Detroit is one of those hot cities right now where people are trying to figure out some things. And the room was full of transplanted Detroiters. So these were people who came in, starting small businesses, or people who were returning, who had ran when things got tough, and now they're coming back. Because there was incentive to come back. So Dan Gilbert had bought up a bunch of buildings, like, hey, if you come teach down here, if you come work in this area, you know, we'll decrease your rent. It was like all these incentives to bring people back. And the way they were presented to MIT Media Lab was like, oh, this is a blank canvas. You can just come in and do anything. And I'm like, it's not that simple, right? And so I had no idea who the director of MIT Media Lab was. Yeah. Like I knew what MIT was. I didn't make the connection between MIT and MIT Media Lab. So I was just like, sir, these people here, they telling you some bullshit, just to be frank with you. And I'm like, if you really want to know the real Detroit, I will be more than happy to give you a tour of the whole city and all of its complexities. And you'll be able to see from block to block why it's so hard to figure things out in these communities, right? They came out, man, we hung out at neighborhood gas stations, liquor stores. And they got a chance to connect with the people. And they were like, it was blowing their mind. It was like, man, these people are so friendly here. Yeah. He was like, these people are so friendly here. They're so open. They're so open to collaboration. Yes. And so we ended up working on like 5 projects in the city. It was an incredible experience for the lab, great experience for us. I've been working with the lab ever since then because of the openness of the director and his willingness to see beyond barriers and beyond comfort. You know? And so it was uncomfortable for a lot of them. You know, we're out here with fancy cameras, and it's like guys approaching us, and they're like, oh, shit, what do we do now, right? And I'm like, you just say, like, we greet each other, and it's like, what up, though? That's how we greet each other, right? I'm like, and you'll see there's going to be a whole shit. It's going to be, hey, how you doing, blah, 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 right? And it was just an incredible experience for all of us, you know, and I learned so much about myself in terms of my own biases, my own perceptions of people who coming into communities want to help. And it allowed me to let my guard down and really just connect with people in the heart space. And I think that when we can be honest about our own prejudice, about our own bullshit, about the things that we lie to ourselves about, you know, we're not always good people. We're not always good people to each other. We say mean things to each other all the time, you know, and we say mean things about each other with all these stereotypes and views. And to me, it just takes courage to step outside of the discomfort. And the lab was willing to do that, and we had a great experience.
Yeah, we've had you almost for an hour. I know you got a hard out, so I'm going to be quick with this. But first off, thank you very much. Super enlightening. And you'd said some great things I just want to touch on because I want to amplify it just to further our own mutual experience. But my time in conflict zones, seeing same things resonate. We come as the U.S. with great intention, great power, great education, all these wonderful things. And we're going to come help you. Help you. And the finger comes out and it's like, I'm going to help you. Right? Yeah. And so one of the things I do is I go, chill out, hang on, let's talk to these people. So I go up to them in the liquor stores and to the barbershops, and I'm like, what's the simplest thing that we could help you guys with? Like, what's so stupid easy that it should happen right now? And they're like, that piece of concrete that someone put over here a couple commanders ago, that fucks our whole neighborhood up. Kids get beat up over there. If you guys could move that, I don't know, 10 feet maybe, that would be awesome. Or if you could pat some dirt down on this dirt path, because we can't get our carts over there safely, and it's messing all our stuff up. You know, so if you guys could just help us with that backhoe and just smash down some. This shit isn't complicated. It's real easy. So you take that back.
But nobody's asked.
Yeah, nobody's asked them. We're like, no, here's your well. They're like, we don't need a well. We have water running through here like crazy. What I need is, you know, whatever the simplest shit is, you know. But we have to take time to slow down. And when we do that, you have to, like you said, proximity. And I'm going to tell everybody right now, as a guy that knows a lot about culture, if you were immersed in a different culture, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to accept that you don't understand what you see. Take yourself out of it and just accept that these people's reality comes from a long experience. And all you have to do is just sit there in it and understand it. And by asking questions, by me saying, wait, you guys say what to greet each other? Oh, we say what up? Oh, okay, cool. Oh, you know what we say? We say the same thing. I say it because of Boys in the Hood. I say it because they said it to Ice Cube. And, you know, and so all of a sudden we're talking about a common thing. And now we've got this tent post in the ground. We're like, right here, we're kind of the same, you know, and then we just keep building on those things. And so if you are a white dude from suburbia and you want to try to help, you don't just show up on Thanksgiving.
Food is the other thing.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
That'll get you.
I did some big work with ice cream. There's no doubt about it. But go more than once, you know. If you want to help, get off your ass, quit watching TV, go to the hood, and find a way to contribute and go more than once. Because you're right, you can't just show up like, man, like I served everybody soup. Actually, condescending motherfucker, fuck you. Yeah, you served me. There's already someone here to serve me food. I'm glad you feel good about that, but I'm still going to be here tomorrow. You know, so
and I just think, like, you know, the way that I see it is like our society gets better when we have the same expectations for you know, little Timothy in the suburbs that we have for little Tyrone in the hood. Yeah. Like once we had the same expectations and we start living our lives like that, like we want to see little Timmy succeed, we should want that for little Tyrone. And until we're honest about that, I just think we'll continue to have these conversations, continue to have these problems. It'll be somebody else sitting in this podcast 20 years from now, it'll be old man, and they'll be talking about the same shit. Yeah. So I think until we get honest about that, we got a lot of work to do, you know. But it starts with these conversations. So I'm happy you guys had me on to just talk about a wide range of things, and you know, I'm excited for you to read the book. I can't wait for your feedback on it.
Super stoked about it. I'll be writing something about it for sure.
Jay puts his name on it. So
I put my name on it too.
Shout out to my man Jay.
Jay Moore, what's up, bro?
All right, everybody. Hey, thank you so much again. Oh, how do we get you on Twitter?
Shaka Senghor. I'm at all my social media.
Is that the best way to grab you right there? Yep. He's got a website. He's got other stuff. You can go out and search all about him. His book is called Righting My Wrongs, Writing with a W. It's available on Amazon. You can get it. You should get it. Man, you are powerful. I love what you do. You are taking on big, hard work. And I'm going to connect you and Devone together, too. I don't know if you guys need to do anything together, but I owe that to the both of you because you guys need to share the same space. And so, and as always, Hilliard, you know I love you. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for jumping
on Twitter.
In. At Hilliard Guest and at Screenwriters RR. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yep. And then, of course, we're Break It Down Show at breakitdownshow.com. I'm Pete A. Turner on everything. And thank you all so very much.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.